And that very mysterious segment of our program this morning is certainly going to be a great and apt opening for our conversation with Mara Hvistendahl, who is the author of The Scientist and the Spy, a true story of China, the FBI, and industrial espionage. And our conversation brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Mara, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
It is wonderful to have you on the air. And my goodness, Mara, I had no idea. And I'm sure that you've gotten that reaction a lot. I have no idea that this is such a big, big issue. Agricultural espionage. Really, I guess it's what our government has been battling in China for quite some time, isn't it?
Right. Well, this story just kind of grabbed my attention, and I couldn't get out of my mind. It starts with a man named Robert Moe, who is found in an Iowa cornfield. I was a Monsanto contract field, and his appearance there set off a massive FBI investigation. It lasted for 2 years and involved car chases and surveillance planes.
There are a lot of different elements to this story. There's big American seed, there is FBI investigative techniques, a very mysterious, foggy sort of relationship between the Chinese government and this big Chinese company, the Chinese agronomy industry. And you turn that into a thriller, and it's just amazing to me. You didn't come to this subject by accident, did you?
I was living in China as a reporter for Science, so I spent many of my days interviewing Chinese scientists and researchers. But I'm actually from the Midwest. I'm from Minnesota. So when I moved back to Minnesota, I thought I had the opportunity to retrace the steps in this case and really tell this story scene by scene.
Well, you told us about Robert Moe, and we just had the introduction to finding Robert out in that field. And the characters in this book really are fascinating people, and Robert right there. And there's another gentleman named Kevin Montgomery that we need to talk about. I don't want to give away what happens in this book because it is such a fascinating mystery story. But Robert Moe, Kevin Montgomery, let's throw in FBI agent Mark Betton and toss them all in there, and maybe you can give us an idea of where this story is going to take us.
Sure. So Kevin Montgomery is a farmer in Illinois and an agronomist. He's a seed breeder. He is hired by this Beijing agricultural company called DBN as a consultant. That meant that he worked closely with Robert Moe, and he was kind of the useful stooge in this operation. So he had no idea that this company had these more nefarious plans. And then a few months into his work, he's starting to get all these questions in his mind, like, what's going on here? And the FBI knocks on his door, and he ultimately becomes a very reluctant informant for the FBI.
He really does. As clumsy, Mara, as this particular attempt at agricultural espionage seems to have been, with Robert out in the middle of the field wearing a suit, does it seem likely to you that there have been other more sophisticated, maybe a little bit more successful efforts by the Chinese? This can't be the be-all and end-all of the Chinese attempts to get this proprietary information.
There has been a massive emphasis on obtaining technology at all costs in China, and that's led a lot of companies, not just seed companies, but other companies as well in a whole variety of fields, to go after technology by any means possible.
Yeah, and to watch how Robert Moe goes about it and the people with which he's involved, and then to understand that this is something that is extremely important to the Chinese. Just talk about the issue of the espionage as it is. Why does China need the hybrid corn seed from these American companies?
Well, people in China have been eating higher and higher up the food chain, eating more meat, which requires animal feed, requires corn and soy, and that's why we've seen demand for corn and soy spike from China. Before the trade war, of course, many states, agricultural states, were exporting massive amounts of agricultural products to China. And just as this has become a major focus for the Chinese government, but combating economic espionage and combating IP leakage has become a big emphasis for the FBI over the past 10 years.
This particular case involves a gentleman by the name of Mark Benton with the FBI. And I mentioned FBI investigative techniques. Was the FBI prepared by its basic procedures for other investigations for an investigation of this type?
Well, they've undertaken many of them over the past few years. So this case happened at a time when there was just a rapid uptick in cases involving China. And just last week, FBI Director Christopher Wray said that there are now over 1,000 industrial espionage cases involving China. So that's just an immense number. So as this emphasis on fighting this threat from China has increased, there have been cases where the FBI has almost banged down people's door, and then the scientists have turned out to be innocent. Mm-hmm. That was not the case with Robert Moe, but there were others who I looked at in the book who had their lives basically ruined, but then were later cleared of charges.
The book is The Scientist and the Spy, a true story of China, the FBI, and industrial espionage. And we're talking with Mara Hvistendahl on the line here this morning on Indiana in the Morning. When we think about this case and the characters who are involved, you gathered up all of this information. You followed all of the threads and found out where they were and where they led to. And then you sat down and you put it into just a wonderful expositionary mystery story. And that whole process really fascinates me. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I went to all the places that came up in the case, talked to all the people whose names I could find, literally retraced steps and tried to recreate scenes that way. So, when it came up that the guys working for DBN had bought a farm in Illinois and that they were trying to pose as farmers there, I went and visited that farm and checked out the. It was interesting, talking to the neighbors in that area. A number of people brought up that we kind of wondered when they bought that farm because everybody feels like it was pretty bad land.
Yeah.
So just 4 years of kind of painstaking research.
Yeah, and you find out about guys like Kevin Montgomery, and he has a fascinating backstory, and just to follow him through his motivations for even becoming involved in the very first place, and then his the idea that he had to maybe honor his dad by completing a journey his dad began but was never able to finish. That's an interesting aspect of this story as well. Kevin Montgomery is a kind of an interesting guy in this whole story.
Oh, right, yeah. I had a lot of fun interviewing him and kind of following him. He comes from a long-standing farming family in Illinois. Was laid off from his job as a seed breeder in the early 2000s, so he became a consultant. So in a way, he was a victim of rapid consolidation in the seed industry. So this case involves not just Monsanto, but also Pioneer, and these are companies that have gobbled up more and more market share over the past few years. There's also this irony that Monsanto was recently acquired by Bayer, so by the end of my reporting, it was no longer an American company, and the U.S. government had spent untold resources defending the IP of a company that ultimately left our borders.
It really, I mean, there are so many back roads to this story, which I guess makes perfect sense when you're talking about farming and all of the back roads through Iowa and Illinois and everywhere else. And if a story can involve the lead singer of Sha Na Na and have to do with Chinese espionage, then we know that we've got a winner, Mara.
Well, I hope the readers will find it interesting. I really did try to structure it like a thriller.
Well, you did a great job on it, and I want to thank you for joining us here this morning on Indiana in the Morning.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate being here.